Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Moore. This is American Investigator. It is Friday, May 16th. I hope everyone is well, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. My guest in a few minutes is U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany. We're going to be talking about many things. He is, of course, from the 7th District in northern Wisconsin. He is my congressman. We got a long conversation ahead of us. We're going to be discussing many things, Trump's accomplishments in the 100 days, what's going to be happening in the 100 days ahead and beyond that, as well as other matters such as how do we get the road bureaucracy under control. That's always a concern of mine. I've just been looking through, by the way, I hope everybody will subscribe to Richard Moore In Depth. And please share the podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple, I hope. It should be. But please, through your Substack or however you come about the podcast, please share it with your friends and subscribe if you will, and ask them to subscribe if you will as well to support independent journalism. In a few weeks, Margaret Byfield, the executive director of American Stewards of Liberty, a great property rights organization, will be here, and you won't want to miss that discussion because the threat to property rights, even though we've gotten rid of Joe Biden and that land grab club, we haven't gotten rid of it on the state level here in Wisconsin. And in fact, in most states in the country, property rights, land ownership, individual liberty, as a matter of fact, is what it all comes down to, all under threat. And Margaret's going to tell us about it and what we can do about it. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. Now, just before we get into the discussion with Tom, I want to take just a few moments and talk about some things in the news. Basically, briefly, I see, what happened here? We have human remains found near Taylor Swift's house. Wow. So either they've discovered Blake Lively's body, or this has become the new dumping ground for the DNC. Probably the latter. I see also in the news that the basketball star Caitlin Clark has now completed her transformation to the elite woke ranks of superstardom by becoming besties with Taylor Swift. Taylor now, of course, needing a new bestie now that she had to get rid of Blake Lively. I'm joking, of course. On a more serious note, I want to talk today about truth tellers. And some things happened this week in the media that make me want to bring this topic up. And by truth teller, I don't mean someone who insists that they know the truth. But I do mean people who have a passion, a commitment to finding the truth, whatever the truth is. These people often come across as angry, or they come across as, or they're labeled as conspiracy theorists, or they're somehow marginalized by the elite mainstream, and particularly the elite mainstream media. But they call truth to power. They insist that the truth be told, and they say things as they see them. That doesn't, again, mean that they believe they know the truth, but oftentimes they will put it out there. And by bringing issues to the table, the truth is ultimately exposed more times than not by these truth tellers. They exist on every level of society. There was a guy in Minocqua. I want to bring him up because he was a perfect example. Minocqua, Wisconsin, my small town in northern Wisconsin. Very hardworking guy, owned a landscaping business, had a passion for his town and his community that he had grown up in all his life. His name was Tom Handrick. Tom Handrick died a few years ago, tragically, unfortunately, in a work accident. But Tom was a truth teller. He was the quintessential truth teller. It seemed he was always on some any governmental issue around town that he was in some way involved, even just as a concerned citizen, and usually just as a concerned citizen. There he was at the town board meeting. There he was at the county board meeting. He called out law enforcement when he felt it was necessary. He stood up. He saw things. He said things the way he saw them, and he called out leaders, no matter who it was, no matter what political persuasion they were, no matter what party they belonged to. He called them out. And Minocqua and the Lakeland area around it is better today than because of him, and he is sorely missed. Truth tellers like this are all across the landscape, and we need to pay attention to them. We need to pay attention to the voices who are so often ridiculed or, as I said, marginalized. Oftentimes, they don't have the answer, but oftentimes they raise the right questions. Now, on the national level, for the first time in a long, long time, thanks to the American people simply having had enough after living through COVID tyranny and Biden's slumberonomics, an army of truth tellers has ascended to some of the highest posts in Washington, also known as the swamp. It might be the first time in our lives this has been the case. Obviously, the deep state is in panic mode. They've summoned the usual idiots, the Hottentots of the corporate media, to shill for them, as they always do. And nobody is listening, except for the useful idiots who celebrate murderers, such as Taylor Lawrence, or who travel to El Salvador to a hobnob with a vile MS-13 terrorist, such as Maryland Senator, what's his name? Chris Van Hollen. Or they burn each other's Teslas in parking lots, activist idiots who don't realize that only affluent progressives own Teslas, so they're burning each other's cars. The point is, the progressive left is in its death throes. And like people who are dying, they leap to embrace their last gasp hallucinations. They don't seem to know one whit what to do about it. And they're not just the usual and useful idiots, they are lost idiots too. That should be a good thing, but unfortunately for us, the useful and usual idiots aren't in charge, and they never have been. Who's in charge? Well, the deep state is in charge, and it's puppet-mastered, gullible, and globalist activists for generations. From here in Wisconsin, our very own Ron Johnson, Senator Ron Johnson, constantly reminds us that the deep state is still lethally dangerous, even with the Trump administration in place. Now, I should not let this get by me in saying that Ron Johnson himself is a truth teller. He became such a truth teller during the COVID pandemic. He gave the stage, he gave voices to the vaccine injured. He did what no other politician anywhere near around would dare to do by giving them that stage. And he deserves credit for it. He is another truth teller, and we're glad to have him. We're grateful to have him in the state of Wisconsin, and the United States should be grateful that he's in the United States Senate. But as he says, the deep state is lethally dangerous even now, even with the Trump administration in place. And that's because bureaucrats persist and resist and persist, rinse and repeat. They've burrowed far deep into the administrative state, which is a kingdom they've spent generations building and fortifying for just such a time as this when they're out of power. They're prepared to fight they are, and they're using the useful and usual idiots as cannon fodder. The enemy's everywhere, especially in the corporate media. Not one of its tentacles can be trusted. Not even, I should say, such supposed conservative media outlets as the Wall Street Journal. The Journal has proven itself recently to be a quintessential example of ongoing globalist corporate propaganda. It tries to stake itself out as a reasonable conservative outlet, though now in this mission, it sees fit to attack Donald Trump every day of the week, except Sunday, and it doesn't do it on Sunday only because they don't publish on Sunday. They are relentless and without any pretense that anything but complete implosion and disaster is on the way. Now, one of the few pundits I do trust, and I would think most of you are familiar with him, is Victor Davis Hanson. He's a distinguished professor of the classics, a military historian, political analyst, and he recently pondered what many people have called the journal's recent turn toward the left. And I want to read to you just what he said about the journal. This was right after Joe Biden had come on with his maiden post-presidential speech. And he said, and I quote, "If you watch Joe Biden's first post-presidential speech, it's to tell you the truth, quite embarrassing. But my point is this. The Wall Street Journal headline was that he attacks Trump, accuses him of cutting Social Security. The article said that Biden looked rested. That was a complete distortion. And when you start looking every single day at the journal, as I'm doing, if it's tariffs, it's disaster. If it's Doge, it's disaster. If it's Ukraine, Trump is doing something wrong. Almost every article, it's like an itch or a twitch, is negative, negative, negative. They can't find a good thing to say." For many years, Hansen went on, and he did write for many years for the National Review, and he says the National Review fell into the same trap. And again, I quote, "And they got into the same frame. They were obsessed with Donald Trump and felt he had been a disaster." That was in 2015 and 2016. Before they knew it, they were criticizing him for positions they had once held. I hope the Wall Street Journal doesn't get into that frame of mind, but something's going on at the Journal, and I fear that it's going to lose them thousands of subscribers, Hansen wrote. Well, whatever's going on there, it should absolutely cost them their subscribers. Reason, common sense, and civility hold sway not any longer at the Wall Street Journal, I might add. But let me hazard a guess as to what's truly going on here. First, they don't call it the Wall Street Journal for nothing. It's a globalist paper shilling from multinational corporations, and big businesses they are now shilling for want to protect a vast slave labor market overseas by opposing tariffs as deranged and dangerous. The tariffs are deranged and dangerous to globalist profits and power. The globalists are also neocon warmongers, and that explains the diss on Trump from a foreign policy perspective. The only difference between the Wall Street Journal and MSNBC is the newspaper's opposition to cultural wokeness. There, they draw the line, but it's a thin one in the policy sand, hardly noticeable. So it's not quite accurate to say the Wall Street Journal is drifting to the left so much as it is showing its globalism. Or should I say, its Brussels sprouts are showing. Now, it's easy to say this is all doom and gloom, but it's not all doom and gloom. While the propagandists are singing for their corporate supper over on Wall Street, the Trump administration and its long derided truth tellers are doing what they do best, telling the truth. There's Tulsi Gabbard, and there's Robert Kennedy. And wasn't it a few weeks ago a thing of beauty to see Kennedy take on autism epidemic deniers with knockout evidentiary punch after knockout evidentiary punch? Here's one of the things Kennedy said at a press conference on the autism numbers. One of the things that I think we need to move away from today is this ideology that the autism prevalence increases, the relentless increases, are simply artifacts of better diagnoses, better recognition, or changing diagnostic criteria. This is coming from an environmental toxin, and somebody made a profit by putting that environmental toxin into our air, our water, our medicines, our food, end quote. Kennedy also stated the obvious. He said, if you accept the epidemic denier's narrative, You have to believe that 98.8% of the children with autism, thousands of profoundly disabled children, were somehow invisible to doctors, teachers, parents. And here we get back to the truth telling and what a truth teller is about. Unlike in the corporate media, which studiously avoids any challenge to establishment narrative, Kennedy ushered in a new day of open inquiry in that press conference. He said, people will know they can research and follow the science no matter what it says without any kind of fear that they can be censored or they're going to be gaslighted, that they're going to be silenced, that they're going to be defunded, delicensed, and we're going to give them permission to do this research. Now that is what a truth teller is, and that is what a truth teller does. Just the other day, Kennedy was back at it in Congress, being grilled and hammered over budget cuts or proposed budget cuts that he's making in offices and programs he's cutting over at Health and Human Services. And once again, and he was just exceptional at coming back and turning the tables on the Democratic narrative. It was the Democrats, of course, who were hammering him in this hearing the other day. And if you can go on YouTube or another platform and find it and look at this hearing, I think it would be well worth it because he did a master job at unmasking the false narrative of the Democrats. He took on Representative Rosa DeLauro, for instance. She was questioning him about the budget cuts, and he pointed out that not so much essential, in fact, not at all essential services were being cut, but that duplicative programs and unnecessary bureaucratic bloat were being eliminated. He threw these statistics at her. For instance, there are 8 separate offices for minority health within HHS. There were 9 separate offices for women's health. There were 27 separate HIV offices and 59 behavioral health programs. Consolidation, cutting. Another lawmaker who went after Bobby was Representative Mike Simpson, who is a dentist, and he was all about fluoride in the water and saying, well, boy, if you're successful in getting rid of all the fluoride in the water, we better make sure we have enough dentists in this country. But again, Kennedy was masterful, pointing out that the National Toxicity Program has done number of meta study, and any multiple number of studies have shown how toxic fluoride in the water is. That fluoride exposure correlates to lower IQ. The higher the exposure, the higher the ingestion, the lower the IQ in the affected population. This really, you can't call I'm certainly not one that's going to talk about settled science and consensual and consensus, but certainly if there is anything approaching that, and let the studies continue, but these studies mount up again and again of how toxic fluoride is. On the other hand, studies show that the most benefits, and we're talking about tooth decay here, the most benefits come in topical applications, again, which Kennedy pointed out. They can be obtained in mouthwashes. They can be obtained in toothpaste. So there's no reason to have fluoride in the water, and he did a master act in that. Steny Hoyer was talking about all the HHS budget cuts. How dare he cut these programs? And Kennedy simply said, no, Mr. Hoyer, you and Congress have spent $2 trillion more than the federal government has. And when you're $2 trillion in the hole, you got to start cutting something. Not only that, he hastened to add, but that what he has done has reduced the workforce, the HHS workforce, really back just to its pre-pandemic levels. During the pandemic, the workforce at that agency grew by 70%, and he's paring it back to 2019 levels. And from Wisconsin, finally, well, not finally, but Mark Pocan, representative from Madison, he wanted to know about vaccines, and in particular, whether Kennedy supported the chicken pox vaccine. Kennedy said he was not going to give advice, and as it relates to all vaccines, he said what he wants to do and what the agency now wants to do is to tell the truth. Put the pros and the cons out there. Put all the science out there and let people have informed consent. That's truth telling once again. But as far as the chickenpox vaccine, Kennedy pointed out that in Europe, they don't use the chickenpox vaccine. Why? Because the clinical trial showed that the populations that get the chickenpox vaccine, the elderly population has a much higher rate of shingles, which of course is devastating to the elderly. And then finally, Representative Rosa DeLauro again said she had been working for 20 years to get rid of red dye in foods. Bobby pointed out he got rid of it in 100 days. That's what truth telling is all about. You know, all these instances of slapping down the fake narratives of the government, a lot of them are dramatic as the testimony of Kennedy was the only way. And they're dramatic as the tales of doom and gloom were told by Democrats years ago. The only difference that I can see is that the tales of yesterday were fictions designed to lead to preferred narrative conclusions, not real inquiries into the truth. And that was particularly true and I think it's been true for decades now, but it became exposed during the pandemic. The inquiries of today, as Kennedy demonstrated with autism and yesterday in the congressional hearing, are the work of those seeking not desired outcomes, but the facts, whatever they might be. It's the difference between gaslighting and truth-telling, and that's the difference between dystopia and a robust, vibrant, democratic society. We live on the cusp of a new age, an age not one of, say, the old HHS and NIH under Anthony Fauci and their fictions, but of truth-tellers' convictions. An age that our old friend and ultimate truth-teller, Ayn Rand, for those of you who are familiar with her, would have loved to have seen. We're entering the age of truth-telling. It's going to be a roller coaster, but it's a great time to be alive to witness it. I'll be back in a minute, and we'll talk with Tom Tiffany. Okay, I'm Richard Moore. This is the American Investigator, and my guest today is U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany, the 7th Congressional District of Wisconsin, my congressional district. And I've had the pleasure of voting for Tom since 2020. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Tom, but welcome, Congressman Tiffany.
Enjoying you, Richard.
Well, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Before I get to the issues, I just want to bring up one thing. It crossed my mind the other day. When I was in my 20s, I worked in a congressional campaign. It was it was upstate New York. It was the northernmost part of New York State. It was the 30th congressional district at the time. It could still be. And it was the largest. And you had to go all the way from western New York, Watertown, Oxford, right across up north from Buffalo, all the way across through Lake Placid to the east to Plattsburgh. And it was a nightmare. It was like, oh my gosh, it was hours and hours and hours. And I think that even for people in northern Wisconsin, when you talk about it, may not get an appreciation of how large your district is, Tom, because it is akin to that. And you can tell us just how large it is. But you not only have the distressing job of going back and forth from the home district to the swamp all the time, and I believe you just told me you're going back tomorrow. My regrets, my condolences. But you also, in constituent service, have a huge district. You're not like in Milwaukee where you can just go around the block and meet constituents. How much of a grind is that?
First of all, I'm looking forward to going back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow because there's good things that are happening out there at this point, and hopefully us at Congress will get the reconciliation bill done. Second of all, I'm not sure New York has 30 congressional districts anymore. They've been losing them with the outflow from the southern states. As my former colleague Matt Gaetz addressed them when we had a hearing in Manhattan a couple years ago, he just referred to New Yorkers as future Floridians.
That's exactly true. And let me tell you, a lot of them are coming to South Carolina, where I'm from too. They're fleeing. They're fleeing the ship. There's no question about that. Yeah. How many counties are in the 7th congressional district?
So there's all parts of 26 counties.
Wow.
I cover almost 40% of the land mass of Wisconsin, nearly half, or I cover 40%. It's nearly half of the land mass of the state of Wisconsin. I would have it no other way. It has all these small towns that are scattered across northern and western Wisconsin. These are some of the best folks you'll find in America, and I am privileged to be able to represent them. Got to put a lot of miles on, but as my mother said, you signed up for the job.
You signed up for the job, and it goes with the territory. It's a large territory, but you do meet a lot of great people, and it's a very diverse district, really, too. I mean, it's rural, but it's very diverse. So, yeah, I'm sure it's a great place. All those small towns are wonderful small towns. Getting into the issues, and I want to spend just a little bit of time on this because there's so much I want to look forward mostly, but going backwards, let's talk about the accomplishments of the first 100 plus days. And you talked about it. It's good to be back. There's a different vibe in Washington now. Good things are happening. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he said, Jesus, I really, usually when Congress gets together, we hope they do nothing, because when they do something, it's usually bad. And, the corporate media always yells, oh, the do nothing Congress. We like it that way, but not now. Now we're glad because you're undoing some bad things that were done. So let's talk about some of the accomplishments, what you think are the biggest accomplishments besides the border. If you want to get back to the border, we can, but we know that illegal crossings are at record lows. And as Trump himself said in the address to the nation, we didn't need new laws. We just needed a new president. How true that was. What do you think besides that, what do you think are the biggest accomplishments?
As we sit here and speak today, let's just look at the past weekend. It appears China and the United States are going to strike an agreement, and hopefully it will be a good agreement for America, contrary to what has happened with preferred nation trade status and the World Trade Organization, all those things that happened 20 to 30 years ago that have really hollowed out America's industrial capacity. And so you have that going on. The UK agreement was struck at the end of last week. You have countries saying, hey, maybe it's time to stop fighting wars. Pakistan and India, as we are talking here on a Monday morning, have said that we're going to have a cessation of hostilities here for a while. Hopefully that's going to be for a long time. And the same thing happening with Ukraine and Russia. And so you have all these things that are happening that are really good on the world stage for America. And you only get that by having strong leadership in the Oval Office. And that's exactly what President Trump has provided here over the first few months of his administration. And so there's been so much accomplished. I mean, it's clearly there's a new sheriff in town. I would say, so think about what you just said in regards to the border. Okay, the border secure, removed. That's how the American people, I think, are viewing it at this point. God, right. They did it. It's over. It's a big deal. This has been going on for decades. And here comes a guy that says, I'm going to fix it. And he did. And it's really good stuff. And I think you're going to see deportations continue. And you're going to have a much more secure country. But more than that, hopefully we get back to a sane, legal immigration system, because I believe in legal immigration, but you can't have what has been going on. So great success. The other stuff that's been going, I mean, people have seen the headlines. I always thought that the biggest thing that would come out of Trump 2.0 was last fall when the president said, I'm going to team up with an organization called Doge, headed up by Elon Musk and others, and we're going to reveal to the American people how their money is being spent. And have we figured out how our money is being spent? And it is in so many ways. I mean, two of the best examples that I give is $5,400 to pay a person to water plants, 7 plants, that is, in a Department of Defense facility. And then you have $200 million that went out in duplicate payments for Medicaid. People say there should be no reform to Medicaid, at least some do, including Democrats. $200 million of duplicate payments that went to the insurance companies that were involved in this. So
Exactly.
there is so much to be found yet. And that has been, I think, one of the biggest accomplishments of the Trump administration. Now, as far as us in Congress, it's giddy up, go. We need to get rolling here. I think the next 100 days, Richard, are the most important for this Congress and this session of Congress and for the future of our country. Because if Congress can get its job done here with reconciliation and other bills, we're going to set America up to really prosper once again.
Yeah, and I want to come back. It's almost like we scripted this because you led right into my next question. You've got the reconciliation bill. You've also got and there's been some talk over the last week. You know, you can't keep up this frenetic pace forever, although I wouldn't put it past Donald Trump not to keep up that frenetic pace. Last I looked, it's probably a dozen more now. He had signed 142 executive orders. And so, but then I heard in the grassroots a little murmuring like, well, wait a minute now. We got to get these executive orders codified because if we don't, if another Democratic president comes along, he's going to wipe them out. And we can't assume that we're going to keep the House in the midterms. We certainly hope we do. But historically, the presidential, whoever holds the presidency loses seats, that party. And also it's a very tight margin, as you know. So we can't assume that. So things have got to be done. And I think even Marjorie Taylor Greene started talking about that. We need to do, as you said, the giddy up and go and get these things codified. I know you have introduced legislation such as on DEI to codify some of that. She has as well. My question being, is there, there's so many executive orders covering so many things, greenhouse gases, wind farm permitting, all that stuff. Is there an actual plan to get this stuff codified?
Some of the stuff is rolling through committees at this point. For example, one of the bills that I introduced, and I think you referenced it, was in regards to the FAIR Act. This is one of the first things that President Trump introduced as an executive order. We're going to have a merit-based society. We're going to have a colorblind society. And I've actually introduced that bill for a couple sessions of Congress. Didn't get much notice, but it is now. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to start moving that. By the way, my co-author is Burgess Owens, an African-American man from Utah. He believes in the same thing. And I think most Americans do. That type of stuff needs to happen. I would be remiss. I should say one other thing in regards. And by the way, we've been passing some Congressional Review Act stuff, the stuff where they were outlawing gas stoves. They had the California mandate in regards to EVs, electric vehicles. Some of those now, we've CRA'd them, which is really important to pull that stuff out kind of root and branch and get rid of it that the Biden administration had put in place in regards to executive orders. One other thing I missed in the at the jump here is that one of the ways you can tell that there's success going on is that I hear from my staff in the district about how the agencies are much more responsive than they were just 4 or 5 months ago.
No,
So, for example, the IRS, Department of Veterans Affairs, they said the reaction from the agencies dealing with constituent concerns is much more timely than it was 6 months ago. And is that any surprise? But to me, that's one of the great things. And it tells me that the cabinet secretaries are saying to the rank and file, hey, you guys, we're going to follow the law. And we're going to be responsive to the people that we are supposed to be serving.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the budget reconciliation bill, and I want to focus in on a couple of just narrow aspects here, and it might not survive in the Senate, but we can talk about that. I'm all about the bureaucracy. I've long believed that the bureaucracy is the dictator. Certainly, they work to thwart Trump in his first administration. We've had now for I don't know how many sessions of Congress attempts to pass the REINS Act, for those who don't know, and if I can remember, regulations from the executive in need of scrutiny, I think that is, and it hasn't been done. So there's two things that came out of the Judiciary Committee, which you sit on, which I think are very important and I'd like you to talk about. One is a sunset provision on regulations in which they would sunset without congressional reauthorization after 5 years, speaks for itself. And then I think, if you'll explain, maybe a modified version of REINS is in that version, in which I think under the REINS Act, for those who are not familiar with it, Congress would have to approve a major regulation if it had an economic impact of $100 million or more. Correct me if I'm wrong on those details. And this version, as I understand it, would require congressional authorization if the regulation increases revenues, which is a way to do the same thing, but to get it into the budget reconciliation bill in an acceptable way. So what do you think of its prospects there? And could you talk a little bit more about that?
Just so for the people that are viewing this, the reason this is important that it have a fiscal nexus, that it either saves the taxpayers money or else it brings more revenue in. And I think you can clearly make the case that this is going to save the taxpayer and the budget money by having the REINS Act implemented. So therefore, the important part of this is it only takes the 51 votes in reconciliation rather than having to go through cloture, which would require 60 votes. And we know no Democrat in the Senate is going to vote for the REINS Act to rein in the federal bureaucracy, because that's what they believe in. They believe in as big a federal government as you can possibly have. And so it's really important that we try to get it in reconciliation if we have any expectations of it passing. I know Senator Mike Lee, that this is a real passion for him. And I'm hoping, I don't know if it is the case, Richard, but I know that there's a play being made in regards to it. I hope that it gets in reconciliation. Time's going to tell here if we can accomplish that goal.
I believe, is it true that the REINS Act hasn't passed even when Republicans had control because they ran into the 60 vote threshold in the Senate? Is that correct? I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The clearing cloture has been the problem. And I mean, now we got to make sure that all Republicans are going to support it. And I don't know why any Republican would not support it, but we've seen that show before also. But it's really worthy. It worked well in Wisconsin, and in other states have been implementing. In fact, I think there's a number of states that are passing it in this legislative session of 2025, and it's time to happen to it federally. It just makes accountability for the agencies. So you don't get to just decide we're going to implement a mill or a rule that costs more than $100 million, that you just simply get to do that at your whim. You are going to have to go back to Congress and make sure the will of the people is upheld.
Now, yeah, there was a criticism, not criticism of it, but a potential flaw, although I think easily fixed. The Competitive Enterprise Institute said, well, if you pass it like it is, that, if it increases revenues, it's got to undergo congressional authorization. That might apply then to bills to deregulate, because you can make the argument that deregulation will save money and increase revenues. I don't know. That seems a little bit abstract to me, but even if it were, you just put in direct revenues instead of just revenues. But I'm sure there can be a lot of horse trading and negotiating around that. But I think the language is substantive because it gets back to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is you guys need to be making laws when there need to be laws, not bureaucrats sitting over in the executive agencies, right?
There's no doubt about it. And as far as the competitive enterprise argument, I'd have to study that to see the case that they're making. Seems like it's an arcane argument.
It does to me too. Something to argue about. So let's just say Congress does nothing. And you mentioned we got to have all the Republicans on board. Um, we didn't have all Republicans on board with the Martin nomination, although I think Tom Tillis got played there as well. But, there is still, it as well as I do, a tremendous uniparty still thing going over there in the swamp. Not all of you are members of the uniparty, but it's still there. Let's say the uniparty thwarts all this and we just bog it all down. There are those who say that the time is ripe, it's long past ripe for a convention of the states. And that I think Ron DeSantis was out and about in the country, some state, Utah, Idaho, I don't really know, but I was reading about it, touting Convention of the States. Texas just passed a clean application for a Convention of the States. So many things you could do there, from term limits to a balanced budget amendment. But I think one of the things, and this is the issue I want you to really address, as well as how you feel about Convention of the States, is there needs to be, we've got a judiciary gone rogue. We've got all these little federal district judges who are little dictators who are putting national injunctions in place. And if Congress, I think, should step in. Ron Paul advocated this for years, and limiting the role and scope of the judiciary and jurisdiction of the judiciary. And maybe if Congress won't, Convention of the States might. What do you think about it?
Well, you're correct. Congress should act on this. And we did pass the No Road Rulings Act about a month ago out of the House. It sits in the Senate. What's the likelihood of it passing over there? Probably not likely if it has to go through cloture. But I think it was a good first step. And I kind of agree with the approach of, let's take a steady, step-by-step approach to dealing with the rogue judges. And I think this was a good start. We have other bills to go so far as to impeach some judges. And in spite of what Chief Justice Roberts said, there are judges who have been impeached. And if you are going to if you're going to take authority that you don't have that makes you a king, there's something that we need to do about that, because we ended the rule of kings and queens 250 years ago. And so we need to make sure that that does not come back. I think that day of reckoning is coming. And so first of all, Congress should act. But if it goes so far, I was the author of Convention of the States in the state of Wisconsin back when I was in the state legislature. And if that's the next step that we have to take, then so be it. Remember, once again, for our viewers, it takes 34 states passing a Convention of the States that is alike, that then Congress can call a convention, and it takes a 3/4 vote, 38 states, to ratify any of the constitutional amendments that may be authored.
Yeah, the ratification would be the same as the normal process, and then you get the 34 there. Yes. Joseph Postel, he's a professor at Hillsdale College, and I want to just step into the broader discussion of the bureaucracy and the delegation of power from Congress. And by the way, for viewers and listeners, when I talk about when I turn on Congress, which is easy institution to turn on, I'm not talking about Tom Tiffany, and I'm not talking about the House of Representatives. I think the biggest problem lies in the United States Senate, and for various reasons. But Postel has written a number of things about although he doesn't come up with an answer, but what he said in the old days, back in by the old days, I mean the late 1800s, the early 1900s, we had this prevailing doctrine of anti-administrativism, if I can say, to get that word out. And that pretty much it's not that you didn't have executive agencies, but that the executive agencies really did back then just implement the law and enforce the law, and Congress wrote the statutes, and the courts settled the differences. And he advocates a return to that, to the progressive idea of that the administrative state took hold, and these technocrats and experts know everything. But he advocates going back to this idea of that the Congress take its power back from the executive and take its power back that it's ceded to the judiciary, and that Congress should really write these standards. And one example would be national ambient air quality standards. Why is the EPA writing national ambient air quality standards when the EPA should be implementing and enforcing those standards? But why can't Congress itself hold hearings and listen to the experts, make the decision, and then come up for a 5-year rule? And he anticipates the arguments coming out of this in that, well, Congress will get bogged down. You can't do all that, and they aren't qualified, and nothing will get done. And of course, nothing will get done, or a lot less will get done. Only the important stuff will get done. But isn't it true, as he argues, that really you guys are as qualified as those guys over in the agency, because they're no longer really experts. Most of them are partisan ideologues, and they can listen to the experts and then they make their political decision, which really should be a political decision you guys make. Now, he doesn't offer any magic bullet about how Congress actually does that, but these arguments against it, that it takes too much time, too much detail, too much expertise, that's sort of the same arguments they make against the REINs Act, and that it bogs Congress down. Well, what do you think about this whole, how do we go about? I think all of us recognize Congress needs to assert its constitutional authority more than it has in the past. That's part of the problem. And how do we go about getting it? It's not an easy task, is it?
To me, what you're explaining is oversight, and we take oversight
Yeah.
seriously out in Washington, D.C., and we should continue to. It should be our first prerogative. I think part of it is just the natural state of, as a legislator, if you get your bill passed into law and you get a pen from the governor or the president, and you get your picture in the paper, all that good stuff happens. And so it's the easy route to go. It's the glamorous route to go. It's far less glamorous to make the bureaucracy be accountable, pulling rules like, you look at like these Congressional Review Act bills we've been doing. They're not sexy, but they're pulling out this stuff that has been that the previous administration was trying to implement, like outlawing gas stoves in America. Those type of things, while they're not as sexy, they are just as important, if not more important. And I actually think that this could be a good time or a golden moment to do this, because I know in the last 2 years of the previous session of Congress, we did serious oversight in part, and both committees I'm on, Judiciary and Natural Resources. I mean, we did a lot of oversight that exposed things, whether it's a border, whether it's, the shutting down federal lands from any natural resources production, whatever it is. We did a lot of oversight, and it was really valuable. And I think it's part of the reason voters said, what, we are going to vote for Republicans in November. And so that oversight function is so important. But I think there's another thing that's going on, especially post-COVID. So many people are far more skeptical of their federal government, especially post-COVID, because they now know. I mean, if you have your eyes open at all, if you are following what is going on, you know that the leadership in the bureaucracy, one of the biggest ones, Dr. Anthony Fauci and some of his other fellow travelers, that they completely misled not just the American people, but the world. And I think people are far more skeptical now. And I think they're willing to say, okay, let's look at, are we really doing the right thing here? It's part of the reason Robert F. Kennedy is the head of the Department of Health Services.
That's right.
He would have never gotten that without what happened with COVID and just the whole MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again.
No, that's absolutely true. And to imagine, if you'd have told me 2 years ago that Kennedy would be running Health and Human Services. You would have Bhattacharya and Prasad and all these guys running these health agencies. I would wonder what drugs you were taking, and it's like, but there they are, and
Only Anthony Fauci's best.
and and these guys and the American public saw what a lot of us saw before. Not to take any great credit, but that the government lied to us a lot. And the government has lied to us, not just on health issues, but on a lot of other stuff as well. And people see that now. And they're a lot more, it's not that the government lies to us all the time, but they lie to us enough that that we need transparency and oversight, as you said. And that brings me, it's that controlling Congress for that reason alone is vital, not just passing legislation, but the hearings you guys hold and the way you can probe issues becomes a great deal stronger in the oversight end of it if you have control of the House, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. Whoever controls that gavel. I mean, think if there were 4 seats that were switched right now, we would probably be having impeachment hearings on Donald Trump.
That's the perfect point. Instead, you're holding hearings on vital issues of the day, and we would be going through impeachment hearings, and that's a perfect point. Another point about Congress too is that a lot of times over the years, a lot of Congress would say, "Well, we're just going to kick this over to the executive agencies, and they will do the dirty work, and they'll get blamed, and we won't." I don't know if that's an argument for term limits or not, but a lot of that was going on and probably still does in some instances in some neighborhoods of Congress. But I ask you in terms of regulatory stuff, going back, you mentioned the great the trade deal that was struck over the weekend with China. We had one with Britain. Tariffs, just from a procedural point of view, and I wrote about this over at McIver. I think number one, Donald Trump's tariff strategy is brilliant, and I think we can start looking at particularly the trade agreement with China and see that is the case, and Britain. But whether you think they're good economic policy or not, is executive action on tariffs constitutional? Rand Paul doesn't think so. There's a couple of conservative groups that file lawsuits on that very issue. What do you think?
I think Congress went and ceded their authority, what was it, back in the 90s on this issue. And now all of a sudden for people to say, okay, hey, we want it back now. I mean, it was the ceding of the tariffs authority by Congress to Clinton and all the presidents that succeeded him that has led to where we are. I mean, it was the ceding of the authority on tariffs. It was getting in the World Trade Organization. It was having preferred nation trade status given to China without some checks in place. I mean, all that stuff was meant to give authority to or to have this globalism happen where where the sovereignty of nations becomes second to this global trade. And I know there was this grand plan that this was going to work, but I think the biggest part of it is China they clearly have not. The anticipation was that allowing China to have full unfettered access to the American marketplace, that they would adopt more democratic norms. That has not happened. President Xi is a dictator. It's as simple as that. And China has made it very clear they seek hegemony over the world in the 21st century. So now that we know that, and it's front and center with us, and by the way, this goes back to COVID also, the Wuhan lab and all that good stuff. I mean, China's proven they can't be trusted. So we need to do things like the bill I introduced to get us out of the World Trade Organization, that we should have annual review by Congress. If there's anything Congress should pull back right now, it is annual review of preferred nation status. That should not be permanent for China. I believe you'd see them be much better actors if we were able to say, okay, what is happening with the Uyghurs in Western China? Let's see what you're doing in regards to slave labor, amongst other issues. So when they took over Hong Kong, I mean, we gave away the family jewels in so many ways back 25, 30 years ago. So I agree with President Trump's approach that he's taking here. And I think ultimately we're going to get to a better place. I think we're actually going to end up, when the dust settles, with tariffs generally being lower across the world. But more importantly, I'm hoping that we are going to see a much more prosperous America as mills and factories come back to this country. I would say one thing, and I've been saying this to the administration regularly. There's two things that have to be coupled with this, with President Trump's use of tariffs. One, you have to have a different regulatory environment. When it takes 5 to 10 years to permit that mill or factory, what investor is going to leave that money lay around for 10 years waiting for a permit? They're not. Now, to the credit of the administration, they're working night and day on that, and they're really doing a good job. The second thing is we need work requirements. We have 5 to 10 million able-bodied people here in America sitting on the sidelines, choosing to cash checks from their neighbors, the taxpayer, rather than working. Those two things need to be coupled with the tariff stuff, and then I believe America is going to be in a much better spot, and you're going to see business and industry come back to America.
I think it's already starting to happen. And also, to add to that, lower energy costs, which we're already seeing. I mean, I went to the gas station the other day and got gas at $2.49. It did double take. It's like that should have been $3.49, right? But no, it was $2.49. But drill baby drill. I mean, the lower energy, turn on the energy faucet here that we have, use our resources, and you're right, absolutely. Along with the tariffs, I think the deregulatory stuff is just will make the economy hum like it was the first time around when we went through all this. You mentioned World Trade Organization. You mentioned the key word there, Tom, and that is all of this comes back. I hear sometimes, well, what the hell do we care about the World Trade Organization? Well, we care because we look around at our hollowed out Midwestern small towns, cities, and we see how, if anybody wants to see China's unfair trade practice, go read the United States Trade Representative's report from 2024. That was Biden administration. They talk about the predatory practices, the intellectual property theft, the heavy subsidization, but it all threatens our sovereignty unless we take control of our economy and trade, right?
Yeah, no doubt. That's why we've introduced the getting us out of the World Trade Organization, is that we need to protect our sovereignty, and we have given it away. I mean, and at the end of the day, Richard, I think what this is all about, all the stuff that we just talked about, it's Main Street versus Wall Street. And President Trump has made it clear. I am for Main Street first. We need to protect them versus Wall Street. Now, I want Wall Street to do well. I hope they do well. Do you know what? They've been doing really well for over 30 years. When you can go all across this 7th congressional district that I represent, and you can see those main streets that were rolled up as a result of factories and businesses closing because of globalization. Let's start looking out for Main Street once again.
I think that's very well said. I agree. Couple of just quick hits. Your Farm Act, you're talking about cutting off subsidies for wind and solar, costing us hundreds of millions of dollars, if I'm reading the statistics correctly. Explain what that's all about.
Well, it's a lose, 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 lose proposition. So what it is it disallows the federal subsidies, which are very rich, for those developers that want to put in wind and solar facilities. And we're seeing some of the best farmland in America right here in Wisconsin that's being converted in the thousands of acres. I was just over and had a listening session in January where 200 people showed up in St. Croix County, some of the best farmland being converted to, I think that was supposed to be a solar facility. So what it does is it says, if you want to convert productive farmland to a wind or solar facility, you will not receive the subsidies. You can build it. You just won't get the subsidy, because I think there's one thing that's a higher purpose than producing energy. Producing energy is really important, right? Growing food is the one thing that's of a higher purpose. And so we should not be sidelining this farmland for something like these wind and solar facilities, because we're losing some of the best farmland in the world. We're ending up with higher utility rates. China's producing the wind turbines and solar panels. They're proceeding to build coal and nuclear plants, baseload power, while we're going to intermittent sources of power. We just talked about how important affordable energy is. We are going to start losing a lot of industry here in Wisconsin if we don't get back to using baseload power, whether it's coal, nuclear, natural gas. We need to do those things and make sure we have baseload power. Otherwise, Wisconsin, #1 manufacturing state per capita in America, we're going to start losing more of that industry if we don't have affordable electric rates.
I agree.
By the way, Richard, we were second lowest for electricity rates 30 years ago. I remember this back in the 90s. I remember seeing the headlines. Second lowest in the Midwest. We're now the second highest. Not good.
Not good. And then how do you feel about on the state level, right of first refusal?
Commented to a commentator in southeastern Wisconsin that if I was in the legislature, I would vote against that bill. I mean, we have public utilities that are monopolies, and it was set up for a purpose to do that. But I don't think all the processes with which they carry out their mission should be monopolized. I think that there should be competitive bidding where possible. I think the bigger point, though, in regards to ROFR is the grander point in terms of this conversion to these intermittent sources of power. This is what happens in all its different ways, all of its different machinations. This is an outgrowth of having something that's been sold to us as a lie. And that is that we can power a 21st century society with intermittent sources of power like wind and solar. That is at the heart of the lie. And all this other stuff that happens as a result of it and the enormous subsidies. Remember, the subsidies are $50,000 an acre. $50,000 an acre that are coming from the federal government. You could not build these without the subsidy. But it all started with a lie. And I would say the ultimate lie was the endangerment finding that CO2 is a dangerous, poisonous gas. As I look out my window and we're talking here, Richard, I see some tall pine trees that are growing as a result of that dangerous gas that is at the heart of the endangerment finding.
And that's exactly right. I've got them out my window too. They're poisonous all. We're goners. Absolutely. And it's amazing to me in terms of some of the right of first refusal folks are talking, and just I don't know, some of the Republicans seem to have lost their mind on this issue in terms of utilities are natural monopolies, but don't worry, we'll be here. The government will be here to provide heavy regulation, make sure they don't raise the rates too high once they've got the monopoly. But yes, the overall issue and farmland preservation, growing food, becomes threatened under all those scenarios. Property rights under threat from every which way from the government. I mean, people talk about government buying land, but then there's conservation easements, which are the big problem right now. And then you've got eminent domain. They can get you 1,000 different ways to cut off zoning, 1,000 different ways to cut off access to the reasonable use of your land. And that goes to the heart of our sovereignty too, I think. Just to close up on the political landscape of Wisconsin, you have watched, as all of us did, a disappointing Supreme Court election. Disappointing not just in the outcome. Brad Schimmel, I thought, was a real good candidate, but in the margin of the loss, 10 points. So you go back to 2016, and you see that in statewide races, we haven't done very well. In fact, that's putting a good spin on it. We've got maybe you can point out, but if you talk about Attorney General, U.S. Senate, governor's races, Supreme Court races, I think we've got Donald Trump once, Donald Trump twice, and Ron Johnson being the Republicans who have won. What does this tell you about the state of conservative politics in Wisconsin and about the way forward?
I think Wisconsin is at the heart of the transformation politically that's going on in America. This has happened very few times in American history. Of course, you have the founding, you have the Republican Party being formed in the 1850s as a single issue party that we are going to live up to all men are created equal. And of course, the worst war in America's history was fought after that, the Civil War. Then I think you saw what happened with the New Deal and FDR. I think you could probably say the 60s may fit in there also. But really, this is one of the biggest transformations that's happened in America. I mean, just look at the issue of tariffs. Tariffs were something all Republicans found repulsive over the last 4 or 5 decades, maybe longer, going back to McKinley, back at the turn of the 20th century. But that's all changed now. And so you have this transformations going on. And people are really, I think the ultimate thing is people are looking for authenticity because you look at the two people you mentioned that won races, Donald Trump and Ron Johnson. So, I mean, think about Ron Johnson winning his 2 races in 2016 and then 2022. Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, Ron's not the most touchy-feely character, and he'll admit that. He'll admit that. But you know what? You know exactly what you're going to get with Ron Johnson, and he'll tell it to you straight. So think about COVID in 2020 and 2021. Who was one of the people that was willing to stand up more than almost anyone else and tell the truth? Ron Johnson.
Ron Johnson.
And there's a whole lot of people that came out and voted for him. I call them COVID voters. And this is just one small example, but I think it illustrates the point is that people who traditionally voted Democrat that were outraged that was happening with COVID and the shutting down of our state and country. And they were like, this is unacceptable. They were Ron Johnson voters. And it's because he was authentic and he did not back down. People like that when they have people that they know they're not always going to agree on particular issues. They know, for example, like with President Trump, there's hyperbole in there. They get it. But they also know that they're looking out for Main Street rather than Wall Street. And I think that type of authenticity is really what the people of the state of Wisconsin are looking for. And I'm not saying that many of the candidates haven't been authentic, but you're also seeing this really shift in the voting base of Wisconsin as it moves to the rural areas away from southeastern Wisconsin to a certain extent.
That's a huge demographic shift. It certainly is. And also, people like Ron Johnson, I mean, I remember he had the courage during COVID to bring them up on a stage when that's just a third rail issue, the vaccine injured, and give them a stage and give them a voice. And whether you agreed with that particular issue or not, you had to admire the man in the position for having the courage to give them voice. And I think that tells people, he'll give everybody a voice. And I think it does go back to that authenticity a lot. One final question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask it about our good governor. Do you think he needs to be hauled away in handcuffs because of the memo he wrote telling agency personnel to ignore those warrants and not give ICE access to the computers?
I'll let Tom Holman and Kristi Noem answer that question. But it's very clear that he stepped up to the borderline when he sent the memo to state employees. And there's no other way to read that. Now, you can parse the words and say, no, he didn't say that they should break the law, that they shouldn't cooperate with ICE or whatever. I got to tell you, you read that memo carefully, and it sure sounds like it to me. And so he was stepping right up to the line in regards to it. I think it's clear that as Governor Evers gets to his second term in office as governor, having served 8 years as the head of the Department of Public Instruction, that he's a tired policymaker. And I think it's going to be difficult for him to be able to win a third term. In fact, you see a few people on his side of the aisle that are making kind of subtle hints also. And so it's going to be interesting to see. But to me, there's 3 key issues in regards to Governor Evers. One is education. I mean, this is the education governor, right? He's
right?
self-proclaimed
Supposedly.
the education governor. 16 years. He's basically been in charge of education here in Wisconsin. What has happened? We are now below Mississippi. Below Mississippi in terms of being able to read and write here in the state of Wisconsin. Uh, that's just unacceptable. Second of all, in regards to energy, second highest cost state versus 30 years ago, second lowest state here in the upper Midwest. And he wants to keep moving to the intermittent sources of power, the unreliable sources of wind and solar, and close down our reliable sources of power. And then the third thing is the economy. When the Trump administration gets done here, the um, the states that have really good governors and they're open for business, which Governor Evers, that's the first thing he did when he came into office. He took down the open for business sign at our borders. The states that are really aggressive and doing a good job, South Dakota, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, there's a number of them that really understand how to have a free, prosperous society or free, prosperous state. They're going to do really well. The states like Minnesota and Illinois that are kind of closed down, they're very authoritarian, they are not going to do nearly as well. Is Wisconsin going to be one of those states that's going to be successful, especially as the federal government takes the shackles off? Or are we going to be like Minnesota and Illinois? I mean, I think Tony Evers has answered that question regularly. He'd rather be like J.B. Pritzker and Tim Walz rather than have the prosperity of one of those states I named earlier.
Well, and I just saw, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you posted the video, I think, of Evers being interviewed by a local some TV outlet over in some small town in Wisconsin. And he's saying, well, I walk around and I don't see many white kids in the school, and people are speaking Spanish everywhere, and all the downtown stores are in Spanish. It's working. It's working, goddammit, he says. And and it's like, what are you thinking, man?
The state of Wisconsin could do so much better. I mean, we're basically just, we're kind of shuffling along at this point. I mean, Wisconsin's a great state. It has great people and all the rest. But I mean, to give one example, you have a Department of Natural Resources under Tony Evers that is talk about shackles. I mean, it is just insidious, the impediments they put in place for people to be able to, to be able to build a house or to put an addition onto a building, whatever. I mean, it is just, it is insidious how they've went about preventing people from being able to create prosperity in Wisconsin. And I think that's emblematic of the Evers administration.
It certainly is. And one quick example of that in our neck of the woods, Oneida County. So they passed, the state passed, so you could use your deck of your boathouse, the top of your boathouse, as a recreational deck. So then the county wants to revise its zoning code, its shoreline ordinance, to come into compliance with everything. And they have it in there so that you can have a stairway, an external stairway up your boathouse to get to the deck. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, it obviously doesn't to the DNR. They say that's not compliant. You can use your deck use your boathouse roof as a deck, but you can't get to it. The stairs are illegal. That's the kind of absurdity, and that's what comes out of the Evers administration. It goes on. And by the way, the DNR now, we got to dig into this, but we got an unqualified climate activist running the DNR over there. Says a lot.
It's not going to get any better. The Department of Natural Resources is the number one agency of all agencies in state government that decides whether there's going to be economic growth in Wisconsin. If you don't make sure that the Department of Natural Resources is actually working with people, implementing the law. I mean, almost every company I talk to, they say, we accept the standards. We have no problem with that. Just make the process so it's workable so we don't have to wait forever. I mean, it goes back to the example we talked very early on here. If it's going to take 5 to 10 years to get a permit, they ain't coming here. And that's the case with Wisconsin. They're going to go someplace else. It's time. It's time for change.
It's time for change. And I'll leave it at that, except if you've got one last word for all the viewers and the listeners out there, give it a go, Tom.
Hey, it's been a great privilege to represent people. It's 5 years now this week, Richard, that I've been out in Congress since I won that special election. It has went so fast in so many ways, and we are focused on trying to get good stuff done here, and hopefully we get this reconciliation bill done, stuff like that. But we are focused on getting America turned around here, and what a great opportunity. We talked about the political realignment that's going on in America. I think it's a great thing. It's happened rarely in American history, but I think it can lead to a much freer, prosperous country for everyone that lives in America.
Well said. Congressman Tiffany, Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you for being here today.
Be joining Richard.
And that wraps it up from here. I hope everybody has an astounding weekend. See you next week.